outsourcing and building out engineering teams in the 1990s, which just makes me old. All these movies were in the movie theater. I'm sure some of you have seen some of them on Netflix or something online. First in my career, I started outsourcing domestically in the United States, very quickly went to India and then Latin America. And really for the past 25 years, I have built out software engineering teams in nearly 30 countries in 5 continents. So I'm missing Africa. If anybody is in Africa here, I apologize. Hopefully someday I'll get there. And I'm also missing Antarctica because there's nobody there. So my focus has really been building out software engineering teams for years and years and years. Right now, I run 2 companies. Equals 11 is a certified Salesforce consulting partner. We have a fully distributed organization with engineers from Latin America through Central and Eastern Europe. And I also have a company called Patrizzi Technology that does software engineering advisory and helps people to or helps companies to select, onboard, manage and manage global software engineering teams. So I'm going to warn you, the information that I'm about to cover is something that I've done in a multi-day workshop in the past. So there's going to be a lot of information that's going to come at you really fast. If you do have questions or comments, please do drop them in the Q&A or the chat. I will try to get to them at the end, but I can't guarantee that we're going to have adequate time to do so. So as we say in the United States, buckle your seatbelts. Here we go. We've got a lot to cover here. So starting off, I want to talk a little bit about the history of distributed engineering teams, just to give us some context for what we're doing today. First, prior to the 1990s, really what we talked about was being decentralized, or companies being decentralized. All that meant is that they had market-specific offices, and those market-specific offices generally dealt with specific tasks that were focused on that market. In the 1990s, we started to see really large Fortune 500 type companies start to outsource and build out separate teams. Initially, on the engineering side, it was in India, and everybody knows that. And so they were really investing in the management and oversight and capabilities to leverage their costs and build out those offshore teams initially in India. What happened then was in the 2000s, the rest of the developing world started to follow. So you started to see the rest of Asia, and then Latin America and Eastern Europe and some of Africa as well do the same thing. Basically, what happened there was it gave access to smaller teams to smaller companies. But what they did was they tried to replicate those best practices of the larger organizations or with larger engineering teams. By the 2010s, what you started to seeing is that gig economy and individual contributors, basically specialists who were being contracted to do work and help aid in this. And we started to see more distributed organizations where the core team was in one place, they might have an engineering team somewhere else, but then some ones and twos elsewhere that were really specialists. And we still see a lot of that today. In 2020, obviously the pandemic hit, and what happened there was it accelerated the adoption. And because everybody was working from home and working remotely, companies started to say, hey, we have to do this, whether we like it or not. Even if our people are local, they're not here together in the same place. And so that put much more of a stress on organizations, and it really focused companies and individuals on saying, how do I lead a team when we're not all in the same place? So the point there is that the genie's out of the bottle. It's not going back. Well, we've got companies in the United States and elsewhere that are bringing people back into the office or doing hybrid environments. It's never going to go back to the way it was in the 1990s or even the 2010s. So that said, there's still a huge lack of trust, especially when you look at management. You're going to see that because there's been inconsistent results, because there's been some horror stories, some real challenges, there's a lack of trust in companies being able to execute. So what we're going to talk about today is what do we need to do to execute successfully, because everybody's doing it, but a lot of companies aren't doing it successfully today. So how do we harness the power of those distributed teams while avoiding the challenges that we've probably all experienced and that a lot of companies and individuals are complaining about? So the first thing I want to start with on how to do this successfully is I like to start with the premise that engineering teams are different, and that's really a good thing. And I'm going to come at this from a software engineering perspective, but I think this really applies to most engineering disciplines. Um, so why are we different? First off, we've been doing this for at least 3 decades already. Finance teams haven't been doing that. Human resources teams, operations teams have not been managing distributed organizations. So we have 3 decades of experience to draw back on what works, what doesn't. Um, and in most industries do not traditionally do what we do in the technology space. They also don't operate as collaboratively as we do. We've got a culture in engineering of open source, of sharing information in online forums, and just operating more collaboratively than I think most organizations are. So what I also like to say is there's smart people everywhere, and we've got to recognize that global talent pool. We're also taught on a day-to-day basis to use and follow systems. So those complex systems and processes are built into what we're doing on a day-to-day standpoint. And finally, DevOps practices really encourage a distributed decision-making culture. So we're already working under the governance of things that are pushing decisions out to the individual and to smaller teams rather than being centralized and pushing things down through people. So I think the way we operate at its core is already supporting that. So as we get into how we do this, we really need to focus on three things: talent, culture, and systems. And it's interesting. I've got a post-it note that has literally been on my monitor for years that says exactly that, because it's there to remind me that if I focus on those things, talent, culture, and systems, if we can get those things right, then we're going to be successful. Um, so, and it's even more critical, and that's obviously important if you're in person, all in the same place. But if you're distributed across a country or across the world, then you need to really focus on doing those things exceptionally well. Because if you don't, the challenges that you're encountering are going to expose themselves even larger than they would if you were all together in one place. So in other words, we've got to focus on the people on the team, the processes that the organization, the teams employ, and the environment that we're creating. So we're going to start with the first one, which is talent. Talent is people. So when I say talent, I'm talking about the people element of the organization. I already said that there are smart people everywhere, and we want to use this to our advantage where others won't. You'll find that other than maybe sales organizations that inconsistently do this, very rarely do elements of a business or organizations within a business leverage that fact and start hiring people regardless of where they are. So I encourage you first to broaden your talent pool. My organization, I said it earlier, has people literally from Poland to Peru, all over Latin America and a lot of Europe as well. And so what you'll find is that A players, so that your top people in the organization want to work with other A players. The best people want to work with the best, and they don't tolerate not working with the best. So if you create an organization that's made up of the best people, it's going to bring in more good people with you. So start there and focusing on getting those right people. And when you're looking for them, you want to focus on these things listed here. People that work well independently, they appreciate accountability, they're outcome focused. I'll talk about each of these in a second, and they value and respect communication in the process. So so you want people that are going to seek independence to solve problems. So they want to be tasked with it. They want to be able to work on something. They want to own the responsibility. They want to be held accountable. And they similarly want to hold others accountable. They like that environment. They also like clear goals. Because they want to know when they're on and off target, and they want to be held accountable, and they want to hold other people accountable. So when there's clear objectives and clear goals, they can do that. And they appreciate the value of communication for effectiveness and efficiency, not for chatter. So your best engineers aren't going to be chit-chatty, but they want to be able to get information quickly, and they want to be able to share information quickly. And so as you're looking at people or looking for people, focus there. The next thing I'm going to talk about is culture. Now there's tons of books, blogs, uh, people that'll talk about these things, all kinds of resources for building out a good business culture. And you should pay attention to all of those. The focus I'm going to have today, though, is going to be on really understanding, embracing, and leveraging our cultural differences. So whether I've got somebody in the United States in Texas working with somebody in Boston, or I've got somebody in the Netherlands working with somebody in Argentina, we have to acknowledge that there are cultural differences in the way we're brought up, and the way decisions are being made and the way we communicate and that type of thing. And if you understand those, then we can leverage that for our benefit. In that, I say that because culture is not important; it's critical, and we need to make sure that we're embracing an organizational culture, but we're also understanding each other's cultural backgrounds and how we can work together most effectively. So I just have a limited amount of time. We've only got about 18 minutes left today. I've got a lot to cover. So I'm going to focus on one component of this specifically, so I can cover some more after. There's a book by a woman named Erin Meyer that's, I don't know, 8 or 10 years old. It is the single best source of information I have found for understanding how to collaborate with people from different global cultural backgrounds. If you take one thing from this and you've got a distributed team that is working, I don't care if you've got people in the UK working with people in Germany. It's worth reading this book. I highly encourage it. So the book's going to focus on broad cultural backgrounds and what we need to do to understand how to do things like the definition of time. If you're working with somebody in Germany and you're working in Austria and you're working with somebody in Latin America, how they define time is different. Like it or not, it's different, and you need to understand that. How they communicate and provide feedback in Asia versus America is different. And it's important to understand that, or you're going to misinterpret what people mean and what people are doing. How people lead are different around the world. How trust is developed is different around the world. It's very different, for example, in Latin America versus Asia. Not a bad thing, it's just different. You need to understand that. And how decisions are being made. And this is just a few examples. Certain cultures are very hierarchical. Decisions are made top and pushed down. Others are it's the exact opposite. Objectives are made at the top and the decisions are executed below and pushed up. And if you don't understand why somebody's behaving some way when you've got somebody on your team in Poland and you're managing them from America or um, from Asia, and you don't understand that, you're going to miss things and you're going to miss your objectives as a result of that. So take the time to read the book and understand more about that. Now, where I'm going to focus the majority of this presentation is really on the process, because as engineers, we love process. Most engineers do, at least. And every engineering process is something that people are used to. I don't care if you're developing IoT hardware, or you're writing firmware, or you're writing software. Um, there's a process to the way we operate, and if you do the following, and you've got a good process and you build a strong foundation around that, and you follow that process, it will work well. Now, what I think everybody needs to acknowledge is that we very often don't take enough time up front preparing for whatever that process is. And I encourage you to take a lot of time. I have found the more time I spend preparing the process and getting buy-in on the process and getting everybody's input on the process, sometimes days, sometimes weeks, at the outset of a new project even, it will save you a tremendous amount of time in the future. So let's dive in and start talking about what that means. First thing is roles and responsibilities. When you build out a software or any kind of engineering team, and you've got a project on the table, the first thing you need to do is is establish and document roles and responsibilities. You need to create, again, a culture of accountability, like I talked about earlier, and I'm going to say that word a lot in the next several slides. So it's important for you to define what are the different roles that are responsible. That could be design, it could be defining backlog, it could be QA and testing, it could be the more traditional engineering components of it. It could be subject matter experts that are defining the business problem. Whatever those different roles are, take a necessary time to define what each is, document the responsibilities of each role. Once you've defined and documented what they all are, what you'll find is sometimes you're going to have multiple people that are wearing the same hat. You need to understand, who's making the decisions on that. Ultimately, somebody needs to be responsible for every element of this. So if it's testing, for example, you need to define who owns testing, how many people are there, who's in charge of that, what does specifically testing mean. And there should be no ambiguity. Make sure that you're excessively clear on ownership of this and on what that means, and so that there aren't any gaps. Now, the next thing you need to do is align upon the process. So in the software development world, which is where most of my career has been spent, you're talking about an SDLC, a software development lifecycle. You need to walk through the entire process of defining the problem, breaking that down into components that need to be developed, sizing those, scoping those, designing, doing everything. If you're doing test-driven development, defining what the test criteria are going to be for the developers. The developers have to do the work. You then test it, review it, and go through release management and everything on the back end. What I encourage you to do is don't assume that everybody understands what that SDLC or whatever that process is going to be, or that process flow is going to be. To get your whole team together, or at least the leaders of each area of the team together, and legitimately take a day. I've had these things take a half a day. I've had these things take a few days, with a whiteboard, and break out the entire process, assign ownership to those different roles that I talked about a couple minutes ago at each phase of the workflow of the process. I find that building out flowcharts here is really helpful because everybody can see what's happening, and this goes from here to here to here to here to here. And then defining within each of those what exactly is happening. What I've also find is very often this is done at way too high of a level. And as you take the time to talk about, well, what does that mean? What you'll find is that there are multiple or a single box, for example, in a flow chart can be broken down, that process, into multiple processes. So take the time, walk through those, break every component down into tasks, so that everybody understands, here's the very detailed process that we're following. Here's who owns each step of that. And then finally, define the definition of done. When the handoff happens, when a person in this space is accepting it from a person in this process, what does that look like? What qualifies as it as being ready to hand off? Far too often in my career, I've seen examples of this team handing it to this team, and this team saying, we don't have everything we need. And if this team's handing it off, they should have everything they need. So you need to agree upon the definition of done of each stage of the process. Take the time to do that. This is exceptionally helpful as you're going through here. Next thing, words matter. I know that sounds silly, but establishing a glossary of terms is critical. What I encourage you to do is go through the project and identify anything that's industry specific terms, especially if you're outsourcing part of this. You're going to have people that aren't as familiar with your industry as people who have been working for your company for 5 or 25 years. So define industry specific terms that are going to be encountered, define technology or project or product specific terms that are going to be there, and document and share that. As an example, I was working with a company that built software a few years ago for mobile phone stores. We found out in the middle of the project that carrier meant two different things. This software was used by the retail stores to sell phones, for example. And in the United States and pretty much everywhere in the world, there's multiple phone carriers. So a carrier could be AT&T or T-Mobile or Verizon or whoever the carrier that was there, but they also shipped equipment. And so shipping could be DHL or FedEx or the United States Postal Service or UPS. And so they used the term carrier in two different places. And as they were building out the software, the engineers who were not here in the United States were confused by what carrier meant, and sometimes it was being misused. So take the time to define those industry specific terms. Create a document, especially at the beginning. It should be reviewed regularly. Anytime somebody is asking a question, hey, what does this mean? That's probably a good opportunity for you to define it in the document. That way, if anyone has a question, they can go back and look at that glossary of terms and say, here's what it is. Or if you're onboarding somebody new onto the team, they can do the same thing. After the first month or so, you can probably go and do this on a monthly basis, and maybe if it's a really long project, on a quarterly basis, reviewing it and updating it. But at the beginning, expect to encounter a lot of edits and additions. Next, define the communication protocol. It's important to understand what needs to be communicated when and by whom. So as some examples, you may have dailies or stand-ups, weekly meetings, end of sprint meetings, monthly reviews. There may be things that happen at certain milestones. If you're doing Agile, you're going to have retrospectives and other ceremonies. There may be something that happens at project completion or status review or account reviews. Identify before you even start the project, especially when you've got a distributed team, what are all the different meetings and ceremonies that happen? Who should be involved in those? Define an agenda outline or outline an agenda for each one of those and have that created in advance. And then put those on the calendar. Let everybody know, here's where you need to be, when you need to be, here's what we're going to be talking about, here's what you need to bring to that. So everybody can come prepared. Again, this goes back to the accountability and empowering people. So everybody on the team should know what the meeting cadence is, when they need to be at what, because everybody doesn't need to be at everything, and what they're going to be discussing then. Make sure you document that before the project starts so there isn't any ambiguity or questions as you get going. Next thing is key performance indicators. You need to define what's being measured, when it's being measured, who's measuring it, what those project milestones are. Obviously, you've got a clear deliverable at the end, but are there certain milestones that need to be hit along the way? What are they? How are they defined? Again, if you go back to the people element that I talked about a few minutes ago, they want to know what they're going to be held accountable to, and when that needs to be done. So define what this is. Define the criteria, just like the definition of done that I talked about a few minutes ago. You need to define how something is defined as having met that milestone or whatever that key performance indicator is. People want to know if they're on target. You also should take the time to define when something gets escalated. If something, you shouldn't wait, you don't want something to fester for weeks or months and then somebody come back and say, hey, this was a problem 3 weeks ago or 3 months ago. You ought to know that, hey, there's a trigger point. If this happens, this gets escalated. So everybody's clear. And again, everybody can hold people accountable within the team. So I've talked a lot about accountability already. If there's one theme to everything I'm talking about today, it is accountability. I like to say that structure creates freedom. I don't know who originally said that quote, but I've Googled it and found it attributed to a bunch of people. But I'm a firm believer in it. If you have good process and people understand the rules of the game and you put the best players in there, it gives them the freedom to work within the process and do their best. And ultimately that enables trust. So we're going to keep talking about accountability here. Throughout the process. Good news here is it looks like I'm going to be able to wrap this up with a minute or two for Q&A. So wrapping all this up, distributed teams allow you to assemble a team that has the best talent. Uh, it's important for us to understand and embrace those cultural differences. They're not a bad thing at all, and if they're used right, we can leverage them appropriately. Um, Clearly define ownership. What are the roles? What are the processes? What are the responsibilities for all this? Um, Likewise, define the process. How is everything flowing? Take the time. I have spent days doing everything we just talked about before a project even started. And it's amazing when you start shining the light on this and talking about these things, how much people disagree, and you realize that if you hadn't talked about this, it wouldn't have you would have encountered these problems down the road because people disagreed on the definition of done or what the process was or who owned something or whatever. Uh, Finally, focus on frequent and effective communication. Again, engineers like to be efficient, and they like to see their work done. So agree upon what needs to be communicated and when and how, and encourage people to communicate. Measure and report everything. If you're measuring, everybody knows their progress. You know where when things need to be escalated if there's a problem, and you can recognize people that are doing a good job. And then again, structure creates freedom. So that's it. You can reach out to me. I'll take some questions now. Good news, I got a couple minutes for them. If you've got questions after this, whether it's about this process, I can help you myself or through my company, Patrizzi Technology, or about Salesforce related things, equals 11. You can contact me at jim.marascio at equals 11, and my LinkedIn profile is there as well. So with that said, I've got about 2 minutes for comments. Let's see if there's any Q&A, and then I'll go over to the chat after. Okay, so you can ask questions in the Q&A if you've got questions, and I'm going over and taking a look at the chat.